Alrighty, let's get started. So it's my pleasure today to be able to introduce Dr. Alexandra Lockwood. Dr. Lockwood did her undergraduate degree in the neighborhood over at the University of Maryland. She's an astrophysicist, astronomy and physics degrees. Went out to Caltech, the other side of the continent, my favorite side of the continent, to get her PhD. And throughout her career and since graduating, she's been involved in many outreach activities, ranging. She was the host and producer of a TV channel called PhD TV. That must have been an interesting lineup. She went over to King Abdullah University, which must have generated some interesting stories that we can hear about in Saudi Arabia. Particularly a woman in Saudi Arabia must have been an interesting experience. Currently, she's at the Space Telescope Science Institute in Baltimore, working with the James Webb outreach activities. I think you may all know that the James Webb Telescope got postponed for another year plus, something. Yeah. Your mind. So you have plenty of time to practice there in the development leading up to that. But it's a great pleasure today to introduce Alexa and Harry Potter and the Scientist's Words.
Thank you. Okay. Where's my clicker? Okay. So I decided that if I put the second title, you guys might think that I was advocating for bodacious acronyms, which I'm not. I just was a little loopy that night while I was making my talk title and came up with some interesting ideas. But you'll see how it plays into the have fun aspect of today's talk. So maybe not. Maybe not. Okay. Oh, maybe it's just not working at all. Try this.
Can you tell?
Not advancing.
You've got the board here. Go over to the rest of the hash.
It's just a minute.
It's just me.
Hey!
Hey! If we turn on the lights, how's that going to work? Can you see something?
I better have that.
Okay. All right. So I wanted to tell you a little bit about my trajectory because A, it's atypical, and B, it sort of explains what I'm going to tell you about and it explains to you my different pieces of training that I've all brought together to come to you today. So I started off as Caltech, as Rick said. I did my PhD. While I was there, I got involved in a little thing called the PhD movie, and then the second one, and I should talk about the third one. This was totally out of the blue, and I did it concurrent with my PhD. But it afforded me the opportunity to travel a bit with the movie and start doing some interviews of grad students. This kind of just all happened. It wasn't intentional, but I did get to meet Stephen Hawking, which was pretty awesome. And I started doing this little just YouTube series. You know, you start something, you do 5 of them, and all of a sudden it's a series. And I started interviewing grad students and sharing their stories, sharing their adventures, and realized that I was more interested in outreach than science, which is really not the path for everyone because it's tough going and there's not a lot of jobs out there. So then, when I was finishing my PhD, I was like, I don't know what I'm doing with my life. But I, long story short, had the opportunity to go to the Middle East, which is clearly a wonderful opportunity that you have to take advantage of. So I went to the King Abdullah University for Science and Technology. It's a small-ish university that was started by the king to basically bring Saudi into the 21st century. Because before they were like, we have oil, we're set, we're not going to do anything. Lots of stories about Saudi Arabia if you want to ask about that. But I had amazing experiences with folks, and I also had the opportunity to go to some professional communications trainings. So I've been twice now, actually, to the Alan Alda Center for Communicating Science workshops that they give. They give a boot camp, and it actually was in their training program to become a teacher of the methods. And I've done the AAAS Communicating Science Workshop, as well as several other communicating science workshops. Those are probably the two most famous ones. So in taking these and being in lots of SciComm talks, I've heard really good things, and then I've heard like talks that were an hour where he barely said 3 things, and one of them was like, avoid jargon. That was like one of his main things. I was like, okay, well, thank you. I'm really glad I sat through your hour-long talk. So I've sort of tried to take everything that I've learned and distill it down to a few slides and hopefully something everyone will take to heart. While I was in the Middle East, I also went to the World Conference of Science Journalism, and then I moved back to the U.S. because the U.S. And I worked briefly on the Joint Polar Satellite System mission, doing communications for that mission, preparing for a launch, and now I am the science communications lead for the Webb mission. We are also preparing for a launch, albeit a little bit delayed. But in my current role, I write stories, I make videos, I organize content, we're redoing our website. I basically all of the science content that comes out of the mission is my behemoth, which is awesome. So that is me, and if you have any questions, you can ask, but I'm done talking about me. All right, let's do a little exercise. Here's pens and paper. Sharon said it was a workshop, so it's a workshop. So if you have your own paper,
a piece of paper out of that.
yeah, if you have your own paper, go for it. Start writing. 3 to 5 sentences. Tell me about your research. And yes, we will be sharing out.
Oh, sorry. There's another bit down here. And I could always grab more. Let me know if we're short of anything. I think probably just the
What?
what's on here.
That's a great question. Tell me about your research. Me. I'm going to give you 2 minutes.
No, never mind.
Bonus points if you stick out your tongue while you write. You can do it in 2 sentences. Good for
You
you.
could do it one really long.
What?
You could do it in one really long.
You could,
Yeah.
and then you would be dinged by your
Yes,
second
yes.
grade English teacher. But not me. Un minuto.
There's a bird.
Okay. People mostly done. All right. If you would like to share, please raise your hand. Okay.
I study water, carbon, and noble gases in the Earth's interior. These systems tell us about Earth's formation, evolution, and habitability.
One more time.
I study water, carbon, and noble gases in the Earth's interior. These systems tell us about Earth's formation, evolution, and habitability.
Okay, now stand up and present it.
I study water, carbon, and noble gases in the Earth's interior. These systems tell us about Earth's formation, evolution, and habitability.
Thank you. What's your name?
Jonathan.
Jonathan. Nice to meet you. Who else?
I look for planets around other stars, in particular small ones like our Earth. They can be tough to find since they're so small, so I'm working on developing methods to help us find these Earth-like planets.
Turn around, face everyone.
Oh, okay. I look for planets around other stars, in particular small ones like our Earth. Because they're so small, it's tough to find, so I'm developing methods to help us.
Okay.
I'm trying to detect planets orbiting other stars by measuring the star's position over time very, very accurately. Hopefully we can detect the gravitational effect of the planets to the star.
I use waves from earthquakes and other sources to image the inside of the Earth. I use these images to understand the structure of the rocks and how they are related to processes that move the Earth's plates, particularly at subduction zones.
Yeah. How else do we know what feathers do?
I study the physics of low-mass stars and brown dwarfs. One aspect of my research is trying to understand if they are good potential hosts to livable planets. The coolest thing about my field of research is we're very close to finding out whether the universe is mostly habitable or not.
Cool.
I'll take one or two more if you want to go. Yep.
Not sure which direction. So I search for astronomical objects that are very similar to giant planets like Jupiter, but that are not in orbit around the star. I study their velocity, composition, temperature, etc.
Anyone else?
Sure. I studied how starlight and sunlight interacts with space dust. This work helps figure out what planets, moons, and planetary disks, that is, forming planetary systems, are made of.
Okay. Now you all have, we have no size knowledge. Now you all have done the experiment, and now as we go through and continue the talk, maybe you can see what you can do better, or maybe you've done it excellently. And those were all really, really great examples. So thank you for standing up and volunteering, and you guys are well on a very good start. A lot better than a lot of initial 3 to 5 sentences that I've seen. So you're off to a good start, and let's see if we can make it better. So this is the outline of my talk. It's pretty simple. If you can't remember these 6 words, I'm sorry, but do better. Okay. Who? Science communication. You. I'm talking to you. What? Communicating science. I've changed this a bit, and I changed it last night because, you know, I was working 20 hours over the weekend at the U.S. Science and Engineering Festival. So, hey. Okay. Where and when? Everywhere, always. Every time that you talk about science, you are communicating science, and you are doing a job that is very important. This means giving a talk at a scientific paper, scientific presentation. This means talking to someone in an elevator. This means talking to your colleague here. This means talking to your nephew or niece or son or daughter. This means talking to Congress. This means talking to a potential funding source. Every time you are talking about science, oral or written or visual, it is a communication of science, and it is important, and you should be thinking about these things. Now, many people see well, am I doing outreach, or am I doing a talk at AAS or AGU? I'm telling you that these principles go everywhere. And they make you that much more enjoyable to listen, especially at a boring technical talk. So, why? I love this quote from Einstein because, number one, you're going to learn more if you can explain it. I mean, talk to people. Try to explain it to your kids, your friends, anyone. But more important than that, maybe more or less important than that, is not your own gratification from it, but it's the fact that most of us are paid off of, well, I heard you guys have a pretty awesome endowment here, which is great. But I'm sure some of your money comes from the government, and it is our civic duty to give back and to share the knowledge that we create. Having a PhD means that you've created your own unique research, your own unique knowledge, which is a pretty powerful thing. But if you don't tell anyone about it, not only are you missing the last step in the scientific method, but you're doing a disservice to whoever funded you. So it's your civic duty, you should do it. Moreover, you're likely to get more money the better you are at communicating science. Well, you may be told not to spend your time doing outreach or communications or whatever. Let me tell you how many JWST proposals, before the deadline was pushed, I read because people said, help me write a better proposal, because it's more likely to get funded. You're more likely to get funded if you write a good proposal. You're more likely to be highly visible in your field, and therefore get more citations, get more networks, if you can communicate well. People will know what you're talking about and know what you do, and they will want to work with you. And I can't stress this enough. Visibility, same thing. It gets you visibility in a positive way. Because not only are you smart, but you can talk about what you're doing. And then, lastly, collaboration. And this, to me, is one of the most critical things, especially in our day and age. So there's international collaboration, which I'm not sure how much this department does that. But if you can communicate what you're doing, I mean, generally, fortunately for us, English is the language of science. But that doesn't mean that there are not still a lot of barriers there. And international, let me tell you, because I lived internationally, provides a lot of resources that if you could get your hands on, they want to work with American collaborators, but you got to open those doors and you got to be able to express your value in terms of what you do. Interdisciplinary, I mean, you have astrobio sitting in the room right here, but interdisciplinary is the cutting edge of research these days. You know, we've done a lot of basic research in a lot of avenues, and if you want to be pushing those boundaries, if you want to be that next great, person who makes an epiphany, look to interdisciplinary. But you have to be, you can't learn everything yourself. You have to be able to figure out where your science is meld and where it can go forward. And I mean, really, really, if you want to be super successful in research, interdisciplinary is basically the low-hanging fruit these days. And industrial. It doesn't apply as much for astronomy, but definitely for seismology. And in general, if you need an instrument built to measure something, you have to communicate exactly what you need and why. And then there's, I mean, for anybody who's not looking to go into academia, the ability to work with industry, to go into industry is very critical. And there's a lot of opportunities for for anybody who can code really, or data science, I mean, it was a big thing. So the potential there for collaborations and just a foot in their door. So how? So the how of science communication is who, what, where, when, why, and how. You're supposed to laugh. That's the whole slide. It just keeps going. I don't know if you guys have ever seen Tim and Eric, but so really, if you can't remember those 6 words, you're SOL for this talk. But let's go into that. So yes, the talk outline is also what you're supposed to take away. Yeah, it's meta. Get it? He's going to keep going until he's black. Okay. All right. Well, I thought I was funny, but I'm not. Okay. So the who. The who is the audience, and this is, I was just speaking with some of you, and this is really important. And somebody asked the question, who's the audience for your 3 to 5 sentences, and that's very important. And the audience is going to affect everything that you do. It's going to affect your message. It's going to affect your motivation. It's going to affect your medium. It's going to affect your tone and your confidence. Now, it is a lot more difficult to stand up there and give a talk to your academic peers versus some 6-year-olds, but you probably should have the same level of confidence, actually. One is because you definitely know what you're talking about and everything you say is cool, and the other one is because you need to seem like you know what you're talking about. At the same time, the jargon is going to be completely different, because Pluto is a planet to kids, and the Milky Way is a candy bar, and you have to, and even words like spectra, or differentiate, or gradient. Gradient is one of my favorite words in the whole world. It's so specific in what it describes. It is not a common word. It is not in everyday vocabulary. And if you try to use the word gradient and just assume that that's a given, it is not. So think about your audience. And this we'll come back to this well, a little bit. But what does your audience want? So what's your name, sir?
Serge.
Serge. So when Serge gave his 3 to 5 sentences, he said 2 things, and then his last sentence was, the coolest thing about my research is blank. That was awesome, because not only was he sharing his why, his motivation, I don't need a surplus, you guys can read it. Not only was he sharing his motivation, but he was like, this is why it should matter to you, because it's cool, and it's cool because of this. Unless somebody is just head over heels, like obsessed with you, they don't want every detail of your life. Why does somebody care about what you do? Because you care about what you do, because you have a motivation, and because it probably relates to them. Earthquakes definitely relates to them. Astronomy, maybe not so much, but you have a cell phone. That technology was created. We may need to mine minerals. Who knows? Find a reason that it matters to them, and maybe it's just because you blew their mind because we found the farthest galaxy, or we found water. Why does it matter to them? How old are they? What are they doing in their life? Does climate change affect them because they live on the coast and the water is rising? Does it affect them because they live in the middle of the country? Think about your audience. We'll talk a little bit more about the what, because that's a lot of the meat of it. But you need to have a message. And the message needs to be one thing. The why, your motivation. Nobody does science for the money. And you don't do science communication for the money, I don't know. Nobody does science for the money. They do it because it's important, because you're learning new things, you're creating new knowledge, you're finding answers to questions that people have. And it's your duty to share it, but it's your privilege to share your passion about it. And if you cannot, for any way, find a reason that somebody would care about your research, they should care because you care, because they're talking to you, because they're having a conversation with you, because you've dedicated your life to it. And just from the get-go, you need to infuse your emotion, which we're not taught to do as scientists. You need to infuse your emotion, your passion for what you do, in what you say. And it doesn't have to be effusive. I'm a loud person, I use my hands. It doesn't have to be that kind of emotion. It could just be like, just the way that you use your words to emphasize how important it is to understand something. And then the where and the when. As I said, it's always. So this is, if you're giving a poster presentation, posters are one of the most, I think we shoot ourselves in the foot by always having posters at conferences. Oh, it's the worst medium. But take advantage of it. Don't put words on there. Don't put words on your poster. Oh my God, you can have a title and you can have captions for your figures. That's it, please. Presentation. Somebody once told me that you shouldn't have more than 40 words in a presentation. Now, I have more than 40 words in this presentation, but not a lot. And they're only to guide you. If I was showing data, it would all be graphs. But this also works if you're writing a technical paper. And I've worked for many years with people who are in the nature publishing business. And so I've met tons of writers and editors of nature and science, and they look for the stories. If you want to get into a top journal, they want the catchy headlines. Obviously, because of that, there's always the, well, when are you going to prove it wrong, right? Like, in the cover of Nature, well, it's going to be refuted in a couple of years. But it doesn't have to be bad science to be a good story. So let's talk a little bit more about the how of science communication. And again, choose your medium depending on your audience. If you're talking to kids, screw a slideshow. Maybe bring things that they can touch in their hands, but talk to them. If you're talking to adults, you can rely on visuals, but you probably want to have something to back you up, just to give you a little bit more confidence. But think when you're choosing your medium, who your audience is. A lot of people don't think about that. And the time that you have. If you only have 5 minutes, screw a PowerPoint presentation, because you want the focus to be on you so you can get your message across. So, the message. There's a really great book by the Heath brothers called Made to Stick. And it is talking about, it's one of those influencer books, and how do you get people to listen to you, and how do you craft a message. And their keys to success are spelled out by the acronym success -1S, but don't worry about that. Your message should be simple. It should be simple. Anybody should be able to understand it, and this is going to depend on how you present it, your language, and the simplicity of your concept. And I promise you, no matter how deep into science you get, you can pull back and make your message simple. If you add an element of unexpected, like, we found this, okay, but it wasn't expected. Oh, interesting. Concrete and credible. A lot of times you build your credibility just by who you are, but at the same time, if your message is too vague, it's not credible. I want to study planet formation in a disk, and so I study the stuff that moves around the central star. Okay, good luck with that. You have to be concrete and specific enough to be credible. Emotional. We'll get there in a second. And stories. So let's talk a little bit more about that. First of all, this is something that I came up with, and it's not a one-to-one mapping, but I really think that there is a very strong correlation between the parts of a story, the parts of a book, and what you have to write in your papers. You have to set it up. You have to write an introduction. What's going on? Who are the players? Why do we care? Then there's something that you're trying to solve, the conflict, your thesis. How did you go about solving that? What are the methods? It's not, we took data for this many nights and then using this filter of this and then da-da-da. You did it for a reason, and there was a sequence of events. And there was a reason to that sequence of events, and that needs to be explained. And then there was the results, and then there was the conclusions, and there's probably, a sequel as well. But your work is a story. Moreover, stories are the way to engage your audience and be remembered. So I really like this graphic up here because it is neuroscience, and therefore it's science, and therefore everybody believes it. No, but it's really true. And I had another example that sometimes I use. It's a really fun cartoon. How much time do we have? Let's go there. Pause. Sorry, I didn't prepare for that. There's a really cool little animation that was a study done in the 1950s, I believe, and it's just this little video of, let me see if I can find it real quick, pause, check your cell phones. watch this.
This was fun. That was so that you just
Okay, so can somebody tell me what they just saw?
A story?
Virus attacking cell and antibodies trying to kill the virus.
Yeah.
Oh.
What else?
Someone locked up a really angry triangle. It escaped and started picking on a smaller triangle, which had a circle friend. Help it, and re-trap it back in the box.
A movie from David Lynch.
How did it make you feel?
Intrigued.
For me, this video, I mean, I talk about it in a second, but it actually really gets me because it seems like a victim situation, and it really, every time I watch it, I'm like, okay. So, 1944, apparently, this was an experiment. What did you actually just watch? Was there any sound?
Yes.
Was there any words? Was it 2 triangles and a circle and 4 square lines? But did every single one of you assign characters to those triangles and circles, and a storyline, and probably emotions? Because we do that naturally. That is how we as humans work. The entirety of human civilization has been, I mean, up until 200 years ago, the only way knowledge was passed was by oral storytelling. And since then, that's the way that we work as humans. We tell stories, and we remember stories. So I really, really like this illustration, and it was an experiment done in the 40s about how people interpreted that. And I think they did something where, like, I'm not gonna, go look it up, but it's really powerful to me. So it affects your brain, it gets in there by triggering. A story has emotions, inevitably attached to it. You have lots of different storylines that maybe you learned about in like elementary school that were man versus man, or man versus himself, or man versus nature. There's always going to be a storyline for what you did. Sometimes the protagonist might be yourself. Sometimes the protagonist might be your little cell or your little star. And it's okay if the star is a protagonist, or if a galaxy, the little galaxy that could. They just found a galaxy that made it without dark matter. The little galaxy that could without dark matter. He did it on its own. Seriously. No, so, and I really like this quote: "Tell me a fact and I'll learn. Tell me a truth and I'll believe. Tell me a story and I'll remember it." If you want to be memorable, tell a story. And that memorability is what's going to bring you up in some collaborator's mind in 2 years oh yeah, doesn't that person work on that? Oh yeah, that was really funny. And now you have a network. So it's one of those things that science communication is your duty, it's what you should be doing, and it's part of where your funding comes from and should go to, but at the same time, it really benefits you. So to talk just a little bit more about some nitty-gritty, and we'll have plenty of time for questions, is there's two main types of what people think of science communication. There's talking to the media, which is a whole different ballpark, and then there's presentations. Now, for both of these, and when I was a graduate student, I had a paper that came out, it got a lot of press, and I was totally unprepared. I had a reporter call me, and I was in line at the Brazilian embassy trying to get a visa to go to the World Cup, and this guy calls me, he's like, oh, my name is Chuck, can we chat about your paper? And I was like, yeah, I should have said no. I should have said, call me back, I'll call you back tomorrow. But I said, yeah, and then he was like, so what about aliens? And and I was like, and then I'm trying to listen for my name, it was terrible. You can prepare for media. Even though they're gonna try to catch you every which way, you can prepare for them. So, let's start with presentations. Make eye contact. I've noticed what every single one of you have been doing. I like to move because I'm just a jittery person in general. I have a lot of energy. So, and these are, again, things like, especially the Alan Alda Center. You, as a theater person, you have to be able to just stand there. Because if you're a character on stage, you could be in the background of a scene, or you could be even just having a dialogue with someone where you're the center of the scene, but you just have to stand there. And so in theater, they train you to stand on your feet for hours at a time without moving your hips, without moving your arms. I went to a theater camp when I was young, and when you're like 15 years old and they're like, stand there for an hour in a circle, it is excruciating. But you learn to have that stillness. But if you don't naturally have that stillness, and you're trying to give a talk, then you're probably going to be going like this, or maybe you say a lot just to get it out, or maybe you're picking something back here, or maybe you're like this and closing yourself off. I walk because it gets out my energy, and because I can talk to the room, I'm talking to you, and by having to follow me with your eyes, you're probably a little bit more awake. So these are ways that you can employ when giving a presentation so that you're not nervous energy back and forth, but you look a little intentional. And I'm still not perfect at it at all, but it's something I try, and you can try it if it works for you. Avoid jargon, duh. But seriously, figure out what's jargon. Talk to someone and say, what did you not understand? Because when we speak to people, in general, we tend to yeah, I know what you're talking about, yeah. And especially if a scientist is talking to you, you want to oh yeah, that's really interesting, oh yeah, okay, oh yeah, oh yeah, nothing, got nothing. But if you have somebody that you can trust who is out of your field and you say, break me down, here, what did I just say? Ask them to tell you what you just said. What words? Do you know the meaning of this word? I do this a lot, so I work every day with writers and illustrators and designers, graphic designers, who come in and they had, sorry, my phone's going off, that's really annoying. I work every day, and we had to do, we're working on a spectroscopy, explanation of spectroscopy and infographic, which is a really complex topic to explain to people. And we started off, and I was like, so, we're looking at the spectrum, and then after about 40 minutes of talking, I was like, do you know what a spectrum is? And she was like, no. Okay, let's go back. That is not a common word. You can say a range. You can say, a rainbow is a variety of colors. Use analogies. Use things that people can understand. I once tried to explain to someone a protoplanetary disk like a donut, like a jelly-filled donut. We can see the outside, but we have to probe it to see the inside. But there's different stuff on the inside, and it's in a different phase. Okay, we're getting somewhere. People can envision a donut. So I try to use humor. I'm not really funny, but it's the only way that I can get off my nervous energy. My brother's a comedian, so I'm like, oh, I can do it too. But who cares? Because the other way of being not funny in front of an audience is shedding your skin. It's shedding your I don't have any dignity. If you've ever seen my videos online, I burped once on camera, and not only did they keep that footage, but they extended the burp. Yeah. So I've already thrown my dignity out the window. But it makes you more accessible to people, because the thing that we don't realize in the ivory tower is that we are in an ivory tower, and we live in a completely different world than most people. And just to be on their level, you have to break it down, and you have to come out of yourself. And so, on the one hand, you're talking to your peers and your academics, and you're at a conference, and you're trying to look good, and you're trying to network, and you're trying to get the next job, and you're trying to look really smart and impress them. And that is an audience, and that is a type of scientific communication, and you can still employ all of these things, let me tell you. But then you have the general public, and you're like, well, actually, science is cool, and I'm not an uptight critic, and you know, I can burp, and you gotta relax it. So however that works for you. Okay, some people are really into self-deprecating humor. Some people are, so analogies. Let's get into analogies. Analogies are great. Think of one and employ it. And the number one thing for media or presentations is practice. Now with presentations, let me tell you, I didn't practice this, but I've given this talk in various forms many times. So I had a really busy weekend, so give me a break. But there's like a golden number. It's like 3 to 5. You don't want to practice your talk any more than 5 times, and you don't want to practice it just once. Okay? Keep that in mind, and you'll figure out why. Visuals. Keep it visual. People want to be looking at something, but if they're reading, they're not listening to you. Ask questions of your audience. Now this really depends on the audience, but at the same time, you can be in a scientific presentation, and you can get up there and you can say, how many people have a theory about how planets are formed? How many people have a theory about how planets are formed? How many people have a theory about how planets are formed? Raise your hand high. I feel like most of you probably do. You probably in this department not have a theory or some idea. But I'm going to tell you today why that theory is a little bit wrong. Or is a little bit right. Or introduces some concept you've never heard of. You can engage your audience in a way that makes sense, that wakes them up, that makes them think about it like, yeah, I do have a theory. Well, she's going to say something that's not in my theory, so I'm interested, so I'm going to pay attention. There we go. One question, you've engaged your audience. If you have a talk longer than 10 minutes, dear God, ask some questions of your audience, please. And make a personal connection. So this works even in astronomy. Like, let me tell you about that time that I went to the Brazilian embassy and I was caught off guard because they called me and asked me about my water paper, and they asked me about aliens, and I'm sitting here trying to justify the fact that they should let me into another country because I'm talking about aliens. Ooh, okay. So, now media. So presentations, you've probably heard it a lot before, and it's really difficult to come to an audience like this and say, this is what you should do, this is what you shouldn't do, because there's moments where you're like, oh, duh, avoid jargon, oh, duh, make eye contact. And then there's other moments where you're sitting in a room like this and you're like, oh, I should do that. I've never asked questions before. That's really interesting. I thought that'd be taboo, but now I'm going to employ that. I'm going to see. Maybe it'll make me more comfortable. Put the onus on the audience, heck. So presentations is kind of hit or miss. Maybe you know everything about giving a presentation, or maybe you're rubbish. But media is a little more difficult to tackle, and I'll tell you, I by far am not the best person to do a media interview. But I've learned some stuff about how to tell you how to do a media interview. So one of my favorite, this is my favorite equation. And I know it's wrong, but it's not wrong because it's so right. And there you go. 3 times 3 equals 1. But it doesn't. But it does. Also, 9 times 1 equals 0. So I went to a professional media guy. He was training all of our head people for one of the launches that I worked on. They brought him in, paid him God knows how much money. He comes from the journalism world. And I sat in on this training for all of our higher ups. He wrote this on the board. He wrote 3 times 3 is 1. And he wrote 9 times 1 is 0. And of course all the scientists are like, stupid guy, journalists can't do math. I've never forgotten it. So what does it mean? Does anybody have any gestures as what it means? I know, right? 'Cause it's wrong. Okay, I'll tell you. Hey, that's why you're here. If you say something 3 times, it's likely to be heard. So if you have 2 minutes in a media interview, and you can say, let's say 10 things, you can have 10 sentences back and forth with a reporter. You can only say 3 things, but you should say them 3 times, and then they'll be remembered. If you say 9 things 1 time, null set. Nothing will be remembered. If you say 3 things 3 times, you might get 1 across. You might get 1 of those 3 things somebody to remember. You have to repeat yourself. Hence the who, what, where, when, and why that has been all over these slides. So when you guys walk away, please, I hope that you remember, next time you're going to communicate something, have I answered who, what, where, when, and why, and how? Because if you haven't done that, well, A, you haven't listened, but B, you're doing yourself a disservice. Who, what, where, when, why, and how. That's the only takeaway from this talk. Okay? So I hope you all remember that. But 3 times 3 equals 1 is a pretty cool little example.
Can I ask
So,
a question about that?
yes,
So that
please.
seems to contradict the storytelling narrative, though. Because in the storytelling, I don't know, unless it's like a Star Wars trilogy or whatever, you can't keep going back to the same things over and over. That's not an interesting story.
that is a great question and a great point. So, when you have a concrete set of time, you should tell a story. When you know that you can get from beginning to end. And that's the difference between presentations and media, really. Media is, and I've done some on-camera media training, and they are like, so what do you think about aliens? So you found this thing, does it have water? Does it have aliens? So what do you really think behind this conspiracy behind Area 51? And they will go there and they will push you. I've been in one of these trainings where this woman, they go, she was just talking about her research or whatever, and he was like, oh, that's interesting, but how do you do science, you're a woman? And she was like, I mean, he was trying to get her, but she is like the staunchest feminist you ever met. So it was really, but they're trying to throw you off guard. They're trying to get you to say something that is racy, is catchy. So prepare your sound bites. If you really want them to know that, I don't know, something, what do people want people to know about your research? That there's thousands of exoplanets out there. Oh yeah, that's really interesting. This one exoplanet that we found, has some interesting results, but let me tell you, there are thousands of exoplanets out there, and 10% of them are likely to be rocky. What is the soundbite that you want them to take away? Repeat that. So this is really especially for media, but at the same time, in a story, the rabbit went to the store, he ran into a wolf. Let's say this is the whole story. The rabbit went to and I'm just making this off the top of my head. Rabbit went to the store, he met a wolf, the wolf chased him down. By the time he got to the store, he was sweaty and he ended up buying tissues in addition to his carrots. So that's the story. It's a terrible story. But he was going to the store. He was going to the store for carrots. The point was he was going to the store for carrots. And then the wolf came and chased him. And then by the time he got to the supermarket, he was so sweaty because the wolf chased him that he needed tissues. And he went there just for carrots, and he only had enough money for carrots, but then he had to buy tissues, and what was he going to do? But he had to buy tissues because he was so sweaty because the wolf chased him. You can still repeat what's going on in your message in a story. So for instance, there's only, you only have a plot because you're following a story, because there's a goal in mind, or there's a conflict that's pushing you. To repeat that conflict, to repeat the message, why are you doing what you're doing? How is where you're at in your story getting you to that goal? You can still integrate that, but that's a very good point. They're a little bit different. So also for media, choose your questions. They will ask you things like, you're a woman in science, why don't you go home and make dinner? Choose the questions that you're going to answer. And if somebody says like, well, what do you think about the flat earthers? Well, that's an interesting question, but I really wanted to tell you about extragalactic astronomy and this, my soundbite that I've prepared. Prepare for media. Prepare your sound bites. If you have 3 things written down that you want them to know, and you literally have them written down as you're talking to them, you will look at them and you'll say, how do I get back to these 3 things? And you don't have to answer any question that you don't want to. And this is pretty critical, and they're used to that. let me tell you, they have a totally different, journalists have a totally different mindset than we do. They are used to having to ask a question 6 times to get an answer close to what they want. Moreover, they just want a cool soundbite. So if you have that in the bag, you're like, oh yeah, this planet is made of farts. That's what I said a lot to the kids this weekend. Ice farts. But they loved it. But if you have that in the bag where they're going to take that and they're going to be like, the planet that's made of farts, that's going to be their headline, you made their job for them, they're going to listen to you. Maybe they asked you about, life on this planet, but instead they got farts and they're going with farts. I just like to say farts. Okay, and as opposed to this talk, keep it brief. What else? Oh, it's not working again, of course. Oh, okay, that's okay, because actually next slide was to go to this little video. Okay.
Hi there, meet Carl. Carl is a coral. Corals are marine animals that can live in large colonies, creating the building blocks of our ocean's reef ecosystems. Healthy corals live in symbiosis with many other organisms, some of which are crucial to their survival. Right now, Carl has no symbionts, leaving him sad and lonely in the great wide ocean. One of the most important symbionts that corals need are algae, known as zooxanthellae. Zooxanthellae live in the tissue of corals. In return for protection, the algae gives the coral nutrients through photosynthesis. Algae are also the source for corals' beautiful colors. Carl doesn't only provide protection though, he also needs it himself. Corals are coated in a highly complex and diverse bacterial community, which is not only species, but also location dependent. The bacterial community, called the microbiome, plays an important role in coral immune protection and pathogen resistance. Together, these relationships create the holobiont of a healthy and happy coral. Corals have many other symbionts too. Crabs, shrimp, and small fish rely on the coral as shelter to help keep them safe from predators. Unfortunately, humans have a strong impact on these fragile relationships and can damage them. Anthropogenic impacts such as temperature increase, pollution, and ocean acidification can cause the breakdown of symbiosis. One of the most studied impacts on coral community is temperature change, which causes the loss of algae from coral tissue. This event is known as bleaching. Corals receive about 90% of their nutrients from algae, so when the algae leaves, the coral is left behind to fend for itself, and may eventually starve. Luckily, many scientists are trying to understand how these coral relationships are created, maintained, and lost to try and help save them. The more we know about corals and their symbionts, the better we can predict coral community responses to these problems and hopefully prevent mass mortality. Healthy reefs lead to healthy ocean ecosystems, which can benefit human society. You too can do everyday little things to help the environment and help keep our coral communities whole and happy.
So, that's this video. That's just that. That was it. Did you guys like that video?
Yes.
Dive beneath the ocean waves and you'll find a bright, bustling...
So, do you guys like that video? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, all of you were enraptured. Why?
That's a story. It's a good story.
Has a story.
Has jargon.
It had some jargon. Did you understand what's going on though?
Because I understand the jargon, but if I didn't, I wouldn't.
But explain the jargon.
symbiosis. I mean, these are pretty complicated words if you're
That's
trying
true.
to convey a message like that to a child.
But then, yeah, no, you're exactly right. I mean, for a child, this might have gone over their head, but they might have also seen, ooh, happy coral, ooh, happy fish. Yeah, the audience for this was the general public. What else did you like or not like?
Designs was
What?
There's characters.
There's characters in it?
There's also some plots, conflict.
Plots, conflict. Did you hear the change in the music? That was really powerful. This was a workshop that I held a couple years ago on film, on storytelling in film. And they put this together in 24 hours. It's really basic. And it's a great, I mean, they started off with the same exercise, 3 to 5 sentences, write about your research. And then it was turned that into a film. And I mean, I'm really impressed with what they did. This was a really fun one. But they made Carl the coral. He's just a coral, but all of a sudden now he was anthropogenic and he had feelings and he had friends. And you wanted him to survive. Wow. And he's a coral, which is, it's actually a living thing, but it's really just like this dead thing in the ocean. So we could do the same thing with stars. Stars have births. Stars have deaths. They're alive. Galaxies are massively interesting. Kids love galaxies. Everybody loves galaxies. A pretty galaxy, bring it to life. So we're going to go back. So now, with who, what, where, when, why, and how. Get it? What? I know, I'm so funny. Okay, try it again. I didn't hear everybody's the first time. We'll hear a few more this time. But try it again. a minute. turn to your neighbor and share with them. Take your
My neighbor high pressure
I tried to find a planet just like this. Turns out this right now, I'm fascinated with the stars, and I went next
Alright, everybody looks like they're done reading. Now does somebody want to nominate their partner to share?
We're going to tell Moody the task.
Yes, somebody does.
It was easier when people would nominate themselves.
You can nominate yourself. You can nominate yourself, just if you think, it's always good to give somebody else a pat on the back. You can nominate yourself. Yours is good. Or nobody. Okay, well, clearly this was a very successful exercise. There was definitely a lot of animation, and I should have had you share at the beginning too, but clearly you guys thought about this. Everybody sat, they wrote their sentences, they were thinking about how do I tell this story better? What's my message? How do I convey what I want to say? I only have 3 to 5 sentences. What's the most important thing? How do I engage the person that I'm going to be telling? These are things to think about no matter what you are writing, what you are doing. I'm so sorry, my work never ends. Okay, do you guys have any questions?
Yeah. So, in your experience, I don't know how much experience you have in more like formal teaching settings, but what do you think are the differences between teaching communication and outreach communication? I'm sure there are lots of similarities, but are there differences?
That's a good question. Well, from the only teaching experience I've had was I worked with an underprivileged high school in LA when I was a grad student, and I created an astronomy course. Actually, I also taught that to like gifted 10-year-olds, which are pretty much the same level. That was true. And you have to. The opportunity with outreach is that you can reach people one-to-one. You can really understand what their level is. Yeah, I don't do a lot of formal teaching, so Yeah, question.
Mine's just more of a comment on that. I would imagine that people involved in outreach are there just because they want to, or they have some level of interest in your audience, whereas in teaching, it's probably not true.
You can transfer some of the responsibility in teaching to the students, which is something you cannot do in outreach. In outreach, if they get bored, they walk away.
That's true. That's true. You have a captive audience. And the other thing that I have learned, because we, at Space Telescope, we have worked with a lot of teachers and formal educators, people who their job is to share this stuff, but they're not necessarily the experts. As a scientist, if you ever offer yourself to a classroom, I mean, if you're ever interested in getting into research, if you ever offer yourself to a classroom, or offer materials to a classroom, or to, you know, a science center or whatever, they will love it. They will take it, and you are the expert, and whatever you can share that relates, ask what their curriculum is, and if you have anything that connects in any way, they will take your help. So,
so when you talk to the media, they might order a nice story, like, oh, your research means this. But the scientist is like, not really, like, you know, this is one of the solutions, blah, blah, blah. So how do you, like, find the common ground?
that's a really good question. And, you know, I mean, in astronomy, we get aliens all the time. And on the one hand, science being in the media is good, regardless. And until we actually show somebody aliens, I mean, people believe a lot of stuff, but people know there's not aliens, and we haven't found aliens yet. So it's not bad to give them a little bit of what they want. So you can say, well, there could be aliens if the percentage of water is this high, or if whatever the important thing is. You can get your message in there while still not completely dismissing them. So something that, like a rule that I really stick to in outreach, and this is completely opposite from science, but 80% is okay. 80% is good enough. If there's a little bit of like whimsy in there, that's fine. If they don't get it completely right, that's okay. Like, unless you're telling people that the Earth is flat or that we found aliens, you know, if the headlines are always going to be something fantastical. Guide them as much as you can towards reality, to what you really want them to say, and that's again preparing your sound bites. But if people are excited about this new galaxy because it doesn't have dark matter and therefore it's, I don't know, I hadn't actually read about this new galaxy, but whatever, it's obviously clearly a hot topic. You know, because it may be more likely to have life because it doesn't have dark matter. If they know that it doesn't have dark matter, cool. If they think it has life because of that, who cares? I mean, like, don't worry about people's, especially for your outreach. In a formal education setting, it's a lot more important to understand people's misconceptions. But for what you're sharing, get people excited. Whatever excites them, go for it. But again, know your audience, you know? I mean, because, yeah.
So there's a famous case from Vera Rubin. There was a UFO scare in Washington in the early 80s. This happens when countries go paranoid, which is why we're seeing UFOs again. So the Post came out and asked Vera about, you know, Vera did everything space. So they came out and said, do you think we were visited by aliens? She said, no. That was it. And I said, well, how can you be so sure? Because I'm an astronomer, that means I know how far long distances really are. And that was the end. That was her whole comment to the reporter. It just sticks in my mind. It's like, yeah, that's the end of the story.
Yeah. But that's not a headline, right?
No, but it made it. You know, it was in the story. Sort of, at least to me, you know, somebody knows what's going on. It would put the end to the questioning, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're not seeing UFOs.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, the whole like, you know, how long have we been communicating? That's a great. You know, you can say, well, we've only communicated 140 light years, and so there's only, you know, some number of planets within that distance, or, you know, habitable stars or whatever. But if we keep going, if we keep sending out our signal, you know, I mean, you can give them what they want without saying anything about what they're saying is right, you know. Yeah, it's tough as a scientist because you want to be 100% true to your science, and generally any of our science is in a very niche, specific thing. You know, it's not that we found this planet, or, you know, we studied the atmosphere of this planet. It's that we studied this one molecule increasing in the one atmosphere of this one planet. You know, it's very minute, but you have to bring it back to folks, to something that they care about. So, yeah.
So this is gonna sound funny, but it's actually a serious question. Did you mean for your jacket to match the color in your PowerPoint? It doesn't now, but it did earlier. And I thought that was actually like really a good way of following it.
Yes. I did not, but. Gold is one of the colors of the Webb telescope, and I just like, I don't know. Flamboyant person.
So did you use the name Harry Potter to attract attention to your presentation?
Yep.
Because I remember during the Messenger mission, you know, they were discovering one crater after another. But how to get the media's attention? They called one the spider because it had all these. So everybody was attracted to the spider, and it got so much publicity. It was just another crater.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So I don't think we've ever filled a room this full. But I think that Harry Potter really was.
I mean, it was also an allusion to telling a story. And like I said, I had that other crazy long title that I thought would also be catchy, but a little bit misleading. But this is, I mean, and let me tell you, like, whether or not you knew what you were coming here for, I think I had an abstract. Did I? No, I didn't have an abstract. I have no idea what you guys came on. But sorry, it wasn't as magical as we expected. But, you know, if you're at a conference and there are 16 talks about different kinds of exoplanets, if your name is clever, you tell them what you want to tell them, but to get their butt in the seat, have fun with it. We take science way too seriously. And while it's really important, we need funding to get it done. And to get that funding, we need the public attention. And to get the public attention, we need to engage them. And humor is a really good way of doing it. That's just my opinion. I mean, same thing, like if you look at a talk title and it's like, I mean, you don't want to be misleading. You don't want to say, I'm going to tell you about how I found life on this planet, you know, and then not. But you can say like, what's up with this planet? The floofiest whatever, you know? I mean, have fun with it. You know, near IR detection of, you know, so-and-so in this atmosphere around transiting blah, blah. Who cares? But what's interesting? You know, you don't have to, it can be, I mean, your abstract is going to tell you what's going on. Have fun with it. Yeah.
Yeah, so when I'm talking to somebody in the general public one-on-one, I can tell by what questions they're asking me sort of where I need to meet them. How do you read an audience? Like, how do you know if you're losing most of them? Because you're going to lose some percentage of people. So how do you kind of get cues about maybe if you need to backtrack?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's where asking questions is a really good way, because you can ask a question where, well, if I ask this group, you know, who here knows something about planet formation, probably everybody's going to raise their hand. And if they don't, I mean, I worded it a little bit differently, but if they don't, I know I'm losing some people, or they're not interested enough to raise their hand to say yes. You can have like a you know, throwaway question in there that engages your audience and says, I'm listening to you, are you listening to me? And also kind of sees where they are. I mean, people will inevitably wander, but that's why I move around. That's why I try to throw humor in there, because if they're paying attention at all, maybe they laugh and maybe they wake up. That's why you can use visuals, you can use videos to really wake up the audience. Because if they're there, they're probably somewhat interested. But again, if you're not talking to them, if you're not telling them something that's interesting to them, and it's the same thing like with a technical talk. You get up there and you're like, I have to tell people what I did, so this is what I did. Why do they care what you did? Do they care about every single step in the way? Probably not. If they have questions about your methodology, you can have backup slides, or you can answer them separately. But if you tell them what you did, why you did what you did, what the result was, why it was cool, how they could potentially use it in whatever they're doing, or how it applies to different things, they're just more likely to be interested. I mean, and you can tell from the beginning, you know, use a catchy title. Say, I am interested enough in giving this talk that I put some thought into my title. And therefore they should be interested. And let me tell you, passion is contagious.
What's your opinion about acronyms in astronomy and having a catchy acronym for a project or something? Any general advice for naming a project? Because I know people could have extreme opinions on acronyms.
Yeah. So my opinion is, and take it or leave it, is go for it. I was actually, if we have more time, I'm happy to do it now, but I realize you guys have things to do, is to do an exercise of everybody take 5 words, and you can still go home and do this. Find 5 words that relate to your science in some way, whether it's like telescope or thermometer or measure or whatever. And then try to make each of those into an acronym. Now let me tell you, I thought it would be really funny to title this talk The Keys of Scuba Diving, because it has nothing to do with scuba diving, but then I literally made a really, I don't know if you guys read it, a really terrible acronym that made scuba diving work, because if you think about it long and hard enough, you can pretty much make any words into an any word into an acronym that relates to what you're doing. Scuba science communication using bodacious acronyms done to incite visceral intrigue, not to mention grumbling. It's pretty much a stretch, but it worked, right? So if don't use orange unless you're studying, an orange isotope. Don't use something really vague. But if you can find anything that relates to what you're doing, it'll stick out. People remember Ice Cube. They remember OSIRIS-REx. I don't know if these are all acronyms, but they remember things. They're not going to remember MSL, but it's curiosity, right? It's not MSL. If you find something catchy, even if it's a stretch, go for it. Have fun. Be memorable.
I just add as a point of information for all the non-seismologists in the room, seismologists love acronyms for their experiments, and so 2 of my favorites are Hobbits and Shire for the 2 most recent experiments going on in New Zealand. So if anyone ever wants to come by and chat about experiment acronyms, that's what I've done.
It's also a great way for you to think about your research. Like, what is the 2 key words that I have to have in there, and then what are those letters, and then what word can I make from that, and then how do I fit it together? It'll get you thinking about the big picture. So, anyone else?
Any more questions? If not, I have the latest bling for Alexandra as a gift for participating. Thank God for that.
Thank you. Feel free to, I think this is recorded, so you have all the slides, but if you need to email me, Nikki or Sharon has my email, feel free to ask. A Working Space Telescope is a really great place to work, so anybody is looking for a job.
Cool.
Thanks.
Thank you.